Welcome to the recorded version of Alzheimer's and Wandering, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
All right, our presenter today is Lakelyn Hogan. Lakelyn is the caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. She holds a graduate certificate in gerontology and is currently working toward a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology. She also holds a Master's in Business Administration, and her undergraduate education focused on marketing and communication studies. Lakelyn has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She's worked on special projects for the University of Nebraska Omaha's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. She is also active in her local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Lakelyn has experience assisting senior clients and helping their families navigate the senior care continuum. She is passionate about helping others, especially aging adults and their families. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation and the floor over here to Lakelyn Hogan, who is going to do our presentation. Thanks for being here with us today, Lakelyn.
Thanks for having me, Steve. And thanks to all of you out there on the line that are joining us. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules. Today's topic of Alzheimer's and wandering is one that I get a lot of questions about. And it's also, unfortunately, a topic that we're seeing more frequently in the news. And with cold weather coming to much of the U.S., it's even more important that we talk about wandering and how to prevent it, because cold weather can quickly make a wandering situation a matter of life or death. So I wanted to start with a brief story to kind of set the stage for today's webinar. Stuart arose early, ready for a new day, and excited about the prospect of going to a job he loved. He put on his favorite suit and tie and headed out the door with his briefcase in hand. He was ready to dive into his daily duties as an insurance adjuster. But in reality, Stuart is 85 years old and has been retired for 20 years. He also has Alzheimer's disease. This brain disease has taken him back to a different place in time. This kind of paints a picture of some scenarios that you might come across when you're working with seniors and their families with Alzheimer's disease. Wandering is one of the potential symptoms of Alzheimer's and other dementias, and those that wander are often trying to get to a familiar destination with a specific purpose in mind, like a former job, such as Stuart had in mind as he got up that morning. And before we dive into the whole presentation today, I wanted to let you know that Monica Moreno, she is the Director of Early Stage Initiatives for the Alzheimer's Association. She's an expert on the subject of wandering, and she partnered with Home Instead to develop some educational materials on wandering, and I'm going to refer to those materials quite a bit today and share some resources towards the end of the webinar. The Alzheimer's Association has lots of great information on wandering, so we were fortunate that Monica was able to help us in developing some key resources for families. And again, I'll share those resources towards the end of the webinar. And before we get started, let's take a look at the objectives for today's webinar on the next slide. By the end of the hour, it's my hope that you'll be able to understand why individuals with Alzheimer's disease or other dementias might wander. I hope that you'll be able to list some of the potential signs and triggers that someone could wander, identify ways to help prepare your loved one or a client's home, and also understand what to do if someone's loved one goes missing or goes out wandering. So first, let's take a look at some research statistics on the next slide. In a survey conducted for the Home Instead Senior Care Network, we found that 46% of family caregivers in North America reported that a loved one had wandered off or become lost. And nearly 1/5 of these family caregivers called the police to find their loved one. And in addition, 71% of those caregivers were taking precautions to prevent their loved ones from wandering or getting lost. So as research shows, it's very important, of course, to prepare the home, to prepare for the event that a loved one might wander, but it is inevitable that in some situations, wandering will occur, even with the best laid plans. So as we go through today, hopefully you'll learn some tips and advice on, again, how to prevent that wandering and some triggers. And that takes us into our next slide. We're going to look at some of the most common triggers for wandering. According to the Alzheimer's Association, there are 5 common triggers that might promote an individual with Alzheimer's or other dementias to wander. Some of those tips that you can see here also offer suggestions on how family caregivers can prevent wandering. So that first one, delusions or hallucinations. Individuals with Alzheimer's disease can misinterpret sights and sounds in their environment. I had a client who consistently woke up in the middle of the night insisting that somebody was in the house, that they were going to harm her, do her wrong. She would also wake up from a nap, even or again throughout the night, believing that someone was on the front porch and that she needed to let them into the house. So she would go to the front door, try to open it. So in this situation, we suggested that a family member put another lock on the door out of the client's line of sight. And that small home modification and safety feature was able to help keep her safe at home and prevent her from wandering. But again, sometimes those delusions or hallucinations can trigger that wandering. I had another client who had Lewy body dementia, so that's another form of dementia separate from Alzheimer's. A lot of times he hallucinated and thought that there were animals outside that he needed his attention, that needed to be walked, to be fed. So that often triggered him to wander. The next trigger could be overstimulation. Individuals with Alzheimer's disease can become easily upset when in a noisy or crowded environment. And if that happens, they may try to escape from the chaos, and as a result, they will wander. So it might be a good idea for family members to avoid large, noisy places if possible. Or if they are out and about, perhaps they could look for restaurants with quiet areas, or if they're having a family gathering or in a social setting, maybe finding a quiet room off to the side or a quiet place to sit would be best, and then invite guests of the party or invite individuals to visit them one at a time or a couple people at a time, again, to reduce that overstimulation. Another common trigger is fatigue, particularly during the late afternoons and evenings. A lot of people have heard this referred to as sundowning. So later in the day, the individual might become more tired, and therefore they might become more restless. You might see them pacing back and forth. So in these situations, activities and exercises during those times of day can help calm them, help them focus on something, and minimize those triggers for wandering. Another trigger might be the disorientation that they're experiencing, and it might be disorientation to the place that they're in or the time period that they're in. A common question that someone with Alzheimer's frequently asks is if they can go home. When are we going home? Can you take me home? This is not my home. And this might be because they might be disoriented to, again, that place and time. They may not recognize that they are already home, or in their version of reality, home might be the childhood home they grew up on the family farm. So again, those crowded, busy places can also cause the confusion and disorientation. And if the individual is feeling overwhelmed, it's best to remove them from the crowded situation if possible. And in general, when someone becomes confused or disoriented, it's important to refrain from correcting the individual. Instead, reassure the person that they are safe. For example, if they keep saying that they want to go home to the family farm, don't tell them, oh, the family farm doesn't exist. You moved away from there years ago. Instead, reassure them that they're safe here with you, and maybe we'll visit the family farm tomorrow or the next day. This can help to ease their feelings of anxiousness, agitation, and restlessness. And it might also help to redirect them to an activity or another topic. You could take them for a walk or a drive, or say, oh, let's look at pictures from the family farm. I'd love to hear stories about Christmas time at the farm. Those types of situations can, again, help redirect them, shift their focus, and hopefully reduce the trigger to wander. And then the final common trigger is changes in the routine or unmet needs. Routine is very important for individuals with Alzheimer's disease. One of my clients had just moved from her home to a long-term care community. She was very confused about leaving her familiar home in her familiar surroundings, and oftentimes the staff at the community found her wandering in her new environment. And she was really trying to get back to the place that was most familiar to her. It's important to reassure individuals with Alzheimer's disease that they're not lost, they're not abandoned. It's important to validate their feelings, but then also, again, try to redirect them. And in situations where maybe somebody has had a recent move, try to arrange their new surroundings to look familiar. If you can bring familiar photos, furniture, if you can set the room up to look almost exactly like their living room at home. You know, the recliner's in the same spot, the TV's in the same spot, their lamp is on the end table next to the recliner where they're used to seeing it. That can also help to reduce those triggers to wander because they'll feel like they're in more of a familiar surrounding. But again, you know, wandering might still occur, so it's important to have safety features in place, and we're going to go into more detail about that later on. In addition to making sure that the environment is safe, another thing to be cognizant of, and something that could trigger wandering, is making sure that their needs are met. If they have an unmet basic need, maybe they're hungry, they have to use the bathroom, these types of things can cause them to wander, especially if they're trying to find the restroom or find the bathroom and they can't remember why they're walking around or what they're looking for. It can create this perfect situation for wandering and can even get them a little agitated and upset. So one suggestion would be make it a practice after every meal or every couple hours to suggest a visit to the restroom. That way you can make sure that those daily needs are being met, especially met throughout the day. So now that we've looked at some of the common triggers, let's move on to the next slide to talk about the whys behind wandering. So why do people wander? Well, Alzheimer's disease is a result of the plaques and the tangles in the brain. And this inhibits the parts of the brain that are responsible for memory, thinking, and behavior. So as a result, people living with Alzheimer's or related disorders may become disoriented or lost, even in their own neighborhoods or their own homes. For those without a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, if you notice them to start to wander somewhat regularly, this could be a sign that they need to visit the doctor and be screened for Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. And as I mentioned in the story at the beginning about Stuart, who was trying to get to work, well, he had a very specific destination in mind and a purpose behind his wandering. You might find that a person wants to get back to a former job, even though that job doesn't exist. Or again, they might have a personal need that is being unmet at the time. Maybe again looking for the bathroom, they're unable to find it, so they go searching and get lost. So generally, somebody has an intent and a purpose for their wandering, but it's a matter of trying to identify what that purpose is and how to redirect that to avoid wandering. And due to the confusion that individuals with Alzheimer's often face, they're unable to ask for help. Or if they need help, they're maybe not sure how to communicate it effectively. So if they do wander, this leaves them extremely vulnerable to weather, to traffic, and to those who might prey on the less fortunate or prey on seniors. And that can create a recipe for disaster. So let's look at some more whys behind wandering here on the next slide. And I know I already commented on some of the triggers earlier, but just know that these triggers for wandering can be very different for everyone. They can run the gamut from, tiredness and confusion at the end of the day. Again, that's referred to as that sundowning, or a change in routine, or moving to a new situation, for example, from a home to a care community. And also the frequency of wandering typically varies according to the stage of the disease. And I want to be very clear, not everyone who has Alzheimer's or a form of dementia will wander. Everyone is different. When you see one case of Alzheimer's, you've seen one case. People can exhibit different behavioral symptoms and throughout the different stages. So just to give a refresher for those that are unfamiliar with the disease, there are generally 3 stages. There's the early stage, the mild to moderate stage, and then the later stage of Alzheimer's disease. So when it comes to that early stage, typically the challenge during this early stage of the disease isn't wandering so much, it's getting lost or disoriented. To give you an example of this, if you have seen the movie Still Alice, it was a blockbuster film. Alice, the main character in the movie, she is starting to realize that something's not quite right. And kind of a pivotal moment in the movie is when she goes out for a jog, something she's been doing for years. She's been running the same route on her jog for years and years. But about halfway through, she becomes very disoriented. She's confused. She doesn't know how to get back home, even though, again, she's run this route many, many times. So a similar situation could also happen to somebody when they're driving. You know, they might drive their kids or their grandkids to school every single day, the same route. But on one particular day, they might not remember where they're going or might not be able to find their way back home. So again, in that early stage, it might be more of a disorientation as opposed to in the mild and later stages, the mild and moderate stages of the disease. Wandering might involve wanting to go somewhere. And I experienced this firsthand with my parents' neighbor, Mr. Grossman. I was leaving my parents' house late one night after family dinner at my parents', and it was dark outside. And I happened to turn the corner and saw an elderly man fully dressed in his sport coat with a hat and his walking cane, shoes on and everything. But I thought it was a little odd. It was dark out. It was about 10 o'clock at night, not a typical time for an older gentleman to be out on a walk. So as I approached him, I realized it was our neighbor, Mr. Grossman, a gentleman I'd known growing up. And so I asked him what he was up to. And he responded, "Could you take me to my house?" And I looked around and I said, "Mr. Grossman, your house is just 2 doors down." And he said, "No, I live on 50th and Center Street," which was a good 5 miles away. So in his reality, Mr. Grossman was still living in his previous home on 50th and Center Street. So eventually I did get him home safe, and his son didn't hear him leave the house when he went to wander. So again, there's some safety precautions that family implemented after that wandering situation, and I'll get to those on the next slide. But in that late moderate stage, you might have an individual experiencing that want or that need to go somewhere. So let's talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. I think we're already there. Perfect. So regardless of the whys, those who wander are often looking for safety and reassurance because they might be feeling that sense of loss, disorientation, abandonment. So if the individual with dementia wants to go home or go to work, we want to encourage families to use communication and focus on exploration and validation. So again, refrain from correcting the person that says, if they wanted to go home, refrain from saying, "Well, you are home. You've lived here for 20 years. Or, "Dad, you know that you moved from your house to my house. You've lived here for several years now." That might just escalate the situation and make it worse. Instead, you could say, "Well, you're going to stay here tonight, and you're safe. I'm with you. I'm sorry that you're upset, but, we can go home tomorrow after a good night's rest." And telling a little white lie in this situation is not a bad thing. Again, you're validating their feelings. You're jumping into their reality and acknowledging their want to go home, but then making sure that you calm them down, you ease that agitation by reassuring them that they're safe and, we'll visit home another time. Perfectly okay to tell a little white lie in the situation, especially if the individual is in a stage of dementia where they might not recognize that it's a little white lie. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this disease affects everyone so differently, which makes wandering unpredictable and sometimes complicated. And because of that unpredictability, it's important for families to get an early diagnosis and put plans in place to keep the individuals safe and independent for as long as possible. So I wanted to look at one more example here on the next slide. And this is an example of a family who is experiencing wandering. So in this example, Dan's wife of 65 years is home. The only problem is she doesn't know it. Dan says that the wife requests daily for him to take her home, when in fact he is actually home, surrounded by the familiar home decor that she's been used to for the past 20-some years. And like we kind of mentioned earlier, Dan's wife was living in her own reality, where home to her meant being a mother, where she raised her 5 children. So now, after the wandering situation has happened several times, of Dan's wife trying to leave the house to get back to that home where she raised her kids, he now knows that that's a trigger. So he's taken proactive approaches to preventing her from wandering, especially going outdoors, because that, again, once they exit the house, that wandering can become potentially harmful. So for Dan's situation and for others, let's look at the next slide. We have some great wandering tips. The behavioral symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as wandering, which we're talking about today, can be very overwhelming for family caregivers, especially when families get that initial diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. They might start thinking, okay, when are they going to start exhibiting these behavioral symptoms? When will they start wandering? When will they start wandering? All of these things are going through their minds. And it's already overwhelming and stressful to care for an individual with Alzheimer's disease. Many caregivers lose sleep over the fact that they're afraid if they're not with their loved one 24/7, or if their loved one is left unattended, that something might happen, something might go wrong. Some caregivers give up their jobs or social circles because they don't want to leave their loved one alone, or it gets to a point when they need around-the-clock care. So I wanted to provide some tips on wandering that we're going to go into detail on in the coming slides. But if a family is able to be proactive and to take steps to keep their seniors safe and prepare their home, then they'll be better equipped if their loved one does wander. So let's take a look at the first bullet point, the be proactive. That's on the next slide. According to the Alzheimer's Association, everyone who has Alzheimer's disease or related dementia is at risk for wandering. Again, doesn't mean that they're going to, but as long as that person is mobile, wandering can happen at any time, and not just on foot. It could happen in a vehicle or even in a wheelchair. Families should be proactive rather than reactive and make a plan before wandering incidents occur. So some of the things that they can do is research the options. It's important for that primary caregiver to educate themselves and educate their family members about the potential of their loved one to wander. And then they can also research different ways to prepare the home, and we're going to go into more detail about that in a little bit. But there are several low-cost options that families can implement into the home to, again, be proactive and prevent the wandering. And then the next thing that they can do is to contact their local first responder or sheriff's office. Many families that I talk to, especially those that come from smaller communities, if their loved one is a frequent wanderer, they have contacted their local sheriff's office. There's usually some sort of form that you can fill out to alert the local authorities at the sheriff's office, at the first responders, the word is escaping me. I apologize. Where the firefighters are housed, you can go there and you can give them the information about their loved one, about your loved one, and let them know that they have a tendency to wander or could wander in the future. And I heard a family, they had a fire station, there's the word, a fire station in their community right down the street, and the husband actually wandered quite a bit. And so she took a picture of her husband down to the fire station and told them, my husband wanders. If you see him, could you please give me a call? She left her phone number with them. So again, a way for families to be proactive is to reach out to their local law enforcement. Families could also keep a journal. And I know I talk about keeping a journal a lot if you follow my webinar series, but if you're able to find out the individual's purpose for their wandering and identify any patterns, it will help the family be more successful in preventing wandering. So the family could keep track of the fact that maybe wandering happens after a meal, or maybe every time mom or dad has to go to the bathroom, you find them wandering throughout the house, and that's because maybe they don't remember where it is. So again, you could have the families record in a journal the different times of day. Maybe, again, it's related to that sundowning. Maybe the majority of the wanderings happening in the evening. Then the family, again, can be proactive, take steps during those specific times of day. Maybe at night they choose to engage them in a certain activity because they know they're likely to wander at that time. Or after meals, they're likely to have to use the restroom, so they're likely to wander. So making it a habit of taking the individual to the restroom after each meal to, again, meet those unmet needs, because that's when we find that they wander the most. So let's take a look at some additional steps on the next slide. So in addition to some things that you can do to your home, you can take steps such as signing up for the free Missing Senior Network. This is a relatively new program, but it is a free web service. You can find it on missingseniornetwork.com, and I'll share that again at the end on the resource slide. But this website allows the family caregiver to create their own individual network consisting of friends, families, local businesses, and if their loved one becomes lost, they can send out a message through the website that notifies everyone in their network. So they can send text messages, emails to, again, notify people in the network. And setting this up in advance can help the family be prepared to handle any incident of wandering. And again, this is a free service. Home Instead developed it within this last year. And unfortunately, people have had to use this system to alert their network that their senior has gone missing. But the good news is that we've been finding after a couple hours, the alert is disabled because the family members have found their loved ones. So this is becoming a very effective tool for the family caregiver. And again, I'll give you that website at the end of the webinar. There's another very helpful resource through the Alzheimer's Association, and that's the Medic Alert and Safe Return Program. These ID bracelets, you can see them there on the screen. It could also be worn as a necklace. They act as kind of an ID bracelet. So if emergency personnel or anybody were to find the loved one wandering, they could call the toll-free number on the pendant, and it would alert the family. So that's another, again, effective way, and I'll give you more information on where to find that, but if you just go to the Alzheimer's Association website to get more information on the Medi Alert Safe Return Program. And then finally, and this is one that might not seem like it would be very helpful, but it could make a big impact, and that's to keep a current photo and a medication list at all times. I recently talked to a family member who suggested the importance of having a current photo. She says that each morning at breakfast, she snaps a quick photo of her husband on her smartphone. That way, if he were to wander that day, she wouldn't have to worry about remembering what he wore because she has a photo of it. So many people these days have smartphones. It's easy to take a quick picture, and that way she could show it to local law enforcement, neighbors, because as I'll touch on here a little bit later, if you contact the authorities, they're going to be asking a lot of questions about your loved one. So this can help you be better prepared to describe the loved one and exactly what they were wearing that day. So again, keeping an up-to-date current photo is always handy. And then the medication list, you might think, why would a medication list be important? Well, heaven forbid anything were to happen to your loved one or to the senior if they were to wander, if there was a medical emergency. That list is going to be very important because the healthcare professionals will be asking for that. So again, it's important to keep those two items handy at all times. So as we transition to the next slide, we're going to look closely at some ways you can prepare the home to prevent wandering. And the safeguarding of the home is really important to prepare family caregivers to prevent wandering. And many products already exist on the market to help these senior loved ones stay safe. So some of these include alarms that attach to the door or window that would alert the family if the individual has exited or opened a window of the home. You could also place covers on the doorknobs, which make it more difficult for the individual to open the door. That could prevent them from exiting the home or going into a room such as the garage or opening the door to the basement stairs, which could be a potential fall hazard for them. Something that I've seen to be effective is also to move the locks out of eye-level view. Everyone is used to unlocking the door right by the door handle. However, if it's out of sight, it's likely to be out of mind. That's how the old saying goes. So you could add a lock at the top of the door or at the bottom of the door to, again, prevent them from exiting the home or prevent them from getting into those more dangerous areas of the home. Something that is not always thought about, do you see this kind of frequently in memory care facilities, is to paint the doors and the door frames the same color as the walls or camouflage the exit in some way. Maybe it's moving furniture in front of the door or rearranging the room to interrupt the traffic flow to the exits. I've even seen in some communities they paint a mural over the door so the door kind of blends in. I'm not sure if that's so much feasible in the home, but as you can see in the picture, that blue door is painted the same as the wall. So if you already had some spatial visual relation issues as a result of Alzheimer's disease, you might view that as one wall. You might not see that as having a door there. So it could be an effective way of preventing wandering. And then also, one example, there was a family who put a motion sensor in the bedroom because the gentleman was getting up out of bed at night and the wife was worried sick that she wouldn't hear him. So that motion sensor would trigger a sound and every time he got up out of bed, and that helped her to manage her husband's wandering. So that's another example. So let's look at some more tips for the home on the next slide. And as I mentioned, falls are a risk for any senior, especially for someone with Alzheimer's disease, because often their visual spatial relations are a little off than the average senior. So if you're able to create safe pathways through the home, that will be very effective, especially if the loved one wanders throughout. So sometimes wandering can be somewhat healthy and okay if it's in a contained, safe environment. For example, if you have a fenced-in backyard, or if you don't have one, you could consider installing a fence. If a loved one is able to roam safely through the backyard, maybe a gentleman who used to do a lot of yard work enjoys being outdoors, sometimes the wandering can be healthy. They might be trying to burn off some excess energy. Or if you have a pathway through the house, maybe the living room and kitchen are somewhat connected and the individual can do laps kind of around the kitchen living room, just make sure that the pathways are safe. There's no garden hoses in the middle of the yard outside in the back that the individual could trip over. Reducing any clutter or, again, those tripping hazards, rugs, stacks of magazines, that can be effective in helping to keep the loved ones safe at home and foster some safe wandering situations. And it's important to keep walkways well lit, especially at night. So if a loved one or a senior gets up to use the restroom at night but they're not able to find the bathroom, that might cause them to wander elsewhere throughout the house and maybe even outdoors if they're really confused. So if you can add a light, a night light, or I've seen some families even take that rope lighting and make a path from the bed down the hall to the bathroom, it really can help the individual follow the light to their destination. So again, these little tips can make a big difference. And I mentioned earlier you could also rearrange the furniture. So instead of having a clear pathway, past the couch to the door, you could rearrange the couch to just create one more obstacle or way thing to get around in the pathway to the door. So could increase the family caregiver's time to get to that individual to prevent the wandering. And then also, organizing and helping to track medications can be helpful. Certain medications for someone with Alzheimer's disease can help manage the behavioral symptoms, and for some individuals that might be wandering. So making sure that they're taking their medications correctly and on time might help prevent wandering. But also it's just a good routine for any and all seniors to be on a regular medication schedule. And in the case of emergency, if you're able, again, to have that medication list handy, that is helpful. And one tool listed up there is Simple Meds that can help organize and sort the medication, and it ships right to the door. So, again, it comes in a nice box with the med list on the side. So that's a resource for families. And, again, I'll share all the resources at the very end. But let's say you've done all you can to prepare the home, you're being proactive, but the loved one still wanders. What happens then? So we're going to start talking about that on the next slide. Even the best prepared families can find themselves in a panic after a loved one has wandered from home. So what should you do if you're unable to locate the individual with Alzheimer's or other dementia? Well, first things first, time is of the essence. So those who wander, they're often found within about a mile of home or at the starting location of the incident. So the first thing you want to do is definitely check the house. Areas like the closet, the yard, that's very important to check the surroundings. And then if you're still unable to locate the individual, then what? So on the next slide, there's a few more tips. You'll want to think of clues as to where that person might have gone. For example, did Mom say that she was going to go somewhere like maybe the store? Did she talk about being out of milk? Maybe that's where she wandered. Or does Dad have a favorite place nearby that he always likes to go? Does he like to walk to the church down the street or the little coffee shop? Those types of clues can help you kind of direct your search from there. So you want to look in the radius of the area, but you also want to allow no more than 15 minutes. If a loved one is not found within 24 hours, statistics show that it's more likely that he or she could be harmed. So some final tips on the next slide. If you can't find your loved one in that initial search, you've searched all the surroundings, the home, the yard, you've looked in the neighbor's yard, you've driven down the street, you've gone to the little post office down the road or other places you might think within the kind of couple mile radius that they might be likely to go, you still can't find them, then you should certainly call 911 and fill out a missing persons report. Make sure that law enforcement knows that the individual that's missing has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, because typically in a normal situation, the person would have to be missing for 24 hours before they can file a missing persons report. However, if Alzheimer's or dementia is a part of the equation, that can expedite that process. And of course, you'll want to have an updated photo, a current medication list on hand, because you're going to need to be prepared to answer some questions such as when did you last see them, what were they wearing. Again, if you were able to snap a photo that morning, that'll help you remember that much quicker. And then if the individual likes to be called a certain name or nickname, that would be helpful when searching for them. And then in addition to alerting the authorities, you'll want to reach out to your network of family, friends, neighbors. So let's, again, look at how you can do that on the next slide. The Missing Senior Network. Again, this is a great resource for the family caregiver. They just type a message and send it out to all of their friends. It even posts to Facebook. So it really can help get the word out really quickly instead of the individual having to type a separate text message to every person or call every person. And, if the individual that wandered, if the main caregiver's a mother, they could call the daughter. The daughter could get online and activate this. So it's really handy, an easy way, and again, that's at missingseniornetwork.com. If you're having trouble convincing law enforcement to take your concerns seriously, or if you just need additional support during this kind of traumatic and stressful time, you can always call the Alzheimer's Association. They have a 24/7 helpline, and they will help you get in contact with law enforcement or contact them and help them realize how urgent the situation is. So those are two great resources, and I promised you many more resources. So if we transition to the next slide, they'll all be listed here. So sometimes it gets to a certain point where, family members, they might be working, they might have other obligations. If the loved one isn't safe at home, if there's a tendency to wander, they might need 24-hour supervision. And if a family can't come up with a schedule of individuals to fill that 24-hour window, it might be a good option for them to reach out for professional help, such as professional caregivers. You can learn more about those types of services at homeinstead.com. That's the first resource. And again, we've already talked about this, but that Missing Senior Network, you can find that at missingseniornetwork.com. A great resource. It gets the word out very quickly. Another very helpful site for tips on how to prevent wandering and a host of other Alzheimer's-related resources. You can visit helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. And if you'd like to educate the local businesses in your area about wandering and Alzheimer's disease, businesses can get certified as Alzheimer's-friendly businesses, and you can find out more at alzheimersfriendlybusiness.com. But it is a good idea. I've mentioned this. If there's local businesses that your loved one would most likely frequent or most likely wander to, it might be a good idea to update them. Hey, if you ever see my husband here without me or my dad here without somebody with him, if you could just give me a quick call, that would help us out a lot. And sometimes, as a caregiver, again, we've talked about how overwhelming and stressful it can be. Sometimes it's nice to know that you're not alone in the caregiving role. It's important to tell caregivers that wandering is a very common part of the progression of Alzheimer's disease, and so although their loved one is experiencing wandering, they're not the only ones. And a helpful resource, there's a Remember for Alzheimer's Facebook page, and on there it's a really neat community of family caregivers. There's education on there. There's sharing support, asking questions, so you can always direct families there. And the Alzheimer's Association has some great support groups as well. We talked about medication safety and about how it's important to have a senior on a regular medication schedule, also have that list help handy. If you need more information on simple ways to manage medication, you can always visit simplemedsrx.com. And, of course, the Alzheimer's Association. I sing their praises all the time. They have such great resources, and you can visit their website, alz.org, ALZ.org, to get more information about that Medi Alert. I mentioned that earlier in the presentation. They have that hotline, which is listed on the previous slide, and then also they have support groups. So, again, getting those families involved in a support group can be very helpful in those family caregivers knowing that they're not alone. And then there's also a really helpful book. It's called Confidence to Care, and it is helping caregivers, those that are caring for someone with Alzheimer's or other dementias, feel, just like the title says, more confident in the care that they're providing. And there's also a corresponding app for a smartphone, and it's called the Daily Companion. And so that app is free and you can download, and both the book and the app are full of tips and advice on wandering and other great resources you can find on alzheimers.org .gov, and then you could also reach out to your local area agencies on aging for resources. So with that, Steve, I'm going to pass it over to you and get some questions started.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Lakelyn. Really appreciate it. Lots of great information. As you can see from the slide up on your screen, everybody, it is time for the Q&A portion of today's webinar. So if you want to send in any questions for Lakelyn or the information that we've been talking about here, please do so at this time. Lakelyn, let's get to the questions here. First question, did the medical field do away with the 7 stages and now it's only 3 stages of wandering that you were talking about?
Well, that's a good question. There's kind of 3 general stages or categories, and within each, there is likely to be more specific stages. But when I talk about it in more general, it's kind of easier for families to understand. There's generally an early stage, a mild stage, and more of a moderate stage. So the 7 stages is still referred to in the medical field, but my apologies. I should have differentiated that. For me, it's more easy to explain to families by using those more general terms.
Okay. Next question: can the new medication potentially trigger wandering?
That's a good question. I think that in my experience, any medication has different side effects, and they can affect individuals differently. And while I am not a physician, that is something, if your loved one with Alzheimer's disease is going to start a new medication, you'll want to talk with the physician about the potential side effects. You could even ask if wandering might be a potential side effect of the new medication. I can't, based on my knowledge of the different types of medications out there, I can't say that one specific drug will or will not cause wandering, but it's very important to talk to the physician, no matter what kind of drug, whether it's Alzheimer's related or not, to ask if there might be some potential side effects. And when you think of the side effects, even if frequent urination is maybe one of the side effects, that could be a situation where the family caregiver might want to take a step back and think to themselves, okay, if they're going to be going to the bathroom more frequently, could that trigger wandering? If wandering is already triggered by that individual by their unmet need of needing to go to the bathroom and not being able to find it. So in that situation, even that, while it's not specific to wandering, it might be that urge to have to go to the bathroom more frequently, then the family can say, all right, so now maybe we'll try to encourage mom or dad to go to the bathroom every hour or every 2 hours, at least get them there. So if they need to use the restroom more frequently, they're less apt to wander as a result of that side effect. So I hope that answers your question, but again, physician is always best to ask when it comes to the side effects of any medication, especially for someone with Alzheimer's or dementia.
Okay. What would you suggest to increase cooperation with local law enforcement with wandering incidents? This is a problem in our area.
That's a really good question. I would say, if possible, that Alzheimer's Friendly Business website might be a good resource for you to look into and see if the local Alzheimer's Association that services your area might be willing to do some sort of education to the law enforcement. Sometimes people don't fully understand that the wandering is due to Alzheimer's disease. They don't quite understand the severity. And so if they're able, education is, and knowledge is power. I think that's a common phrase. So if you're able to get them to maybe do an Alzheimer's Friendly Business training, I know a lot of people wouldn't consider a sheriff's office or a local fire station to be a local business, but they do serve the community, so that might be a good option. Or again, And maybe you partner with your local Alzheimer's Association to do that sort of training or outreach to better educate them. That is difficult because when something's when someone goes missing or there's a traumatic situation, those first responders are usually who we tend to call first. So if we're able to educate them in your local community, that would make a big difference. And if you're in a community that's not getting good cooperation from the local law enforcement, I definitely reach out to your local Alzheimer's Association because they can help facilitate that. But look for your other resources. That MissingSeniorNetwork.com is a way that you can spread the word to members of your community if a loved one goes missing. So I'm sorry. I feel for you. My heart feels for you that your community is not being able to, or your law enforcement is not cooperating in your community. But again, I would really try for some education. Whether it's through the Alzheimer's Association or maybe through a local support group, you all come together and share your experiences with them. That might be just as powerful.
Okay, next question. I want to know whether there's any technology out there to assist with locating a missing person, perhaps some type of device that will help know the location of the memory-impaired person who has gone missing, something that they wear around their neck or wrist or something like that.
Yes, there are. If you were just to Google like a human tracking device, which sounds a little unsensitive to the subject, but there are bracelets with a GPS tracker or something that you can put in the shoe of the individual. Maybe if they're not willing to wear a bracelet, you can put it on their shoe, and that can help locate the individual. Sometimes the medic alert, the buttons that people can push if they fall. I believe some of those types of safety devices have also a GPS component to them. So yes, there are some devices out there. Again, I probably couldn't even list them all on one slide. There's lots of different companies, but I would suggest there's all sorts of reviews written about them. And also, you could also reach out to your local Alzheimer's Association or visit alz.org. They would also have some suggestions on maybe some devices specifically that they found to be useful. But I know that they exist. And even cell phones, if the individual carries a smartphone with them. I know this is common especially in those with the earlier onset, the younger individuals that are developing the disease. They usually will have a cell phone on them. You can do the Find My Phone app. That can help locate them. Good question.
Okay, next question. We have a Silver Alert program here in North Carolina through the police department. Is this a national program? It is similar to Amber Alert for children. Do you have any input on that?
I commend the state of South Carolina, was it? That is fantastic that you have that. Not every state does. But I know that the Alzheimer's Association, in conversations I've had with them, they're trying to push for that in every state. So while your state is fortunate enough to have it, not every single state has that yet. I know even in my home state of Nebraska, they're working with our local government to get that put into place. So you might want to do a little Google search to see if your state has the Silver Alert, like silver as in gray, kind of to learn that there's an older adult missing. I think that that's great, and I'm really excited that states are moving towards having that option. It will just help us find seniors even faster.
Okay, next question. If one could draw or create some sort of pattern, like you mentioned, keeping a journal, could using a replacement behavior around the time a person wanders help to alleviate the wandering?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so if you're noticing maybe after lunch, they tend to get a little restless, they tend to wander, or they tend to, they sit at the kitchen table and they look out the window while they eat and they want to go outside, something like that. So that's the time they tend to wander, to want to get out of the house. Redirecting them to an activity is really can be really helpful. So maybe it's doing some exercises, maybe it's going for a walk, because sometimes they also have some pent-up energy that they just want to walk off or get out of their system. So yes, or maybe it's watching a certain TV program. Maybe it's doing some sort of activity that they really enjoy. Maybe it's helping to cook dinner in the evening time because you know that they get restless once the sun goes down. So yes, replacing or substituting an activity in those times when they seem to be most anxious or when you're seeing a greater pattern in the wandering behavior, that will be most certainly helpful, or should be most certainly helpful in that situation.
Okay, Lakelyn, do you have any tips or can you recommend any activities for Alzheimer's patients to avoid wandering?
I think it really depends on the individual. I've done several webinars on how to care for someone with Alzheimer's, and my best tip on trying to find activities is to find ones that are meaningful. So if you're able to kind of use clues from their past, hobbies that they used to enjoy, things that they used to do that they might still enjoy today but in more of a modified version, those are going to be some really great activities for those individuals. So for instance, if an individual worked in a bank, sometimes sorting coins is a great activity because it's money. They're used to handling money. Maybe they can't count the coins, but they can separate them into dimes, pennies, nickels, those types of things. Or maybe they loved to bake. They loved to cook. So getting in the kitchen, helping to stir the batter, or just simple things. Even activities that help them feel useful, like helping fold laundry. I mean, these don't have to be grand, like craft activities or anything of that sort, but getting them engaged in some sort of activity and then reassure them along the way, especially as they get into that later stage of Alzheimer's disease, letting them know they're doing a good job of that activity and they're being helpful. That can help them feel useful, feel really good about themselves, because what I see a lot is individuals with Alzheimer's disease, they're losing a lot of their abilities to do things, especially do things that they used to love. Like the gentleman at the very beginning, we talked about how he was an insurance agent, and he liked to get up and go to work every day. Well, what if the caregiver got out some papers and asked him to help sort papers or put paper into envelope? Even if it seems like a meaningless activity, it might be meaningful to that individual because it's something that they used to do and enjoy and love. So I would, again, just take clues from their past and try things. Try them once. If they don't work today, it doesn't mean they won't ever work. Maybe give it a few days, try that activity again, or try a variety of activities. You might be surprised at the different activities that capture their attention. That's a really great question. And if you go to helpforalzheimersfamilies.com, there's a lot of great information on that site about activities. If you just search, there's a search bar, search for activities. Lots of great suggestions will come up.
All right. Well, Lakelyn, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our hour here, and we're just about out of time today. But I want to thank you for a really great presentation and for being here with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.